Politics and religion. I hear much talk today about keeping politics out of the pulpit. Many people put on Facebook or other social venues, social media accounts, well, let's keep politics out of the pulpit, and that politics should have nothing to do with the pulpit, and we don't have any business talking about political issues in the pulpit. So let's keep politics and religion separate. It kind of goes back to what people used to say, two things don't ever talk about at all, and that is politics and religion. Except in this case, it is in the pulpit religion, but no politics. Let's just analyze this for a moment. In any discussion in which there are differences of opinion or differences of ideas, or in any issue whatsoever, there ought to be a clear definition of what we mean by politics. What is meant by keeping politics out of the pulpit? If we mean by politics, for example, activities within an organization that are aimed at promoting one individual above another, or improving one's status and one's climbing the social status in that particular organization, if that's the kind of thing we mean by politics, then of course that have nothing to do with what's being taught in the pulpits. Typically, those kinds of politics are considered to be devious. That is competition between individuals. But I don't think that's really the kind of politics that people have in mind when they say keep politics out of the pulpit. If, however, on the other hand, keeping politics out of the pulpit, we mean activities or ideas that are associated with the governance of a country or other areas, such as cities and states, well, let's just break that down for a moment. If we're talking about activities such as registering people to vote, or campaigning or giving a campaign speech or sloganeering in the pulpit, obviously the pulpit is not the place for any of that. That ought to have nothing to do with the pulpit. However, if we're talking about principles by which people should live that overlap with principles that should govern a society, whether it be a local community or a state or a national government, I say absolutely that should be a part of the pulpit. If we're talking about principles by which people live, moral principles should be upheld. If we talk about moral principles that should be upheld in society, should the pulpit address it? Absolutely, absolutely. And who comes up with the idea that, well, that kind of politics should have nothing to do with the pulpit? Let's just break it down even further to think about some of these particular issues. Let's say, for example, that we preach about homosexuality. Is that a political issue or is that a religious issue? Well, it's both, isn't it? Can we point out in the pulpit on the political spectrum who it is that supports homosexual marriage? Well, now people are going to get excited. Well, you're going to point out Democrats. Well, that's exactly what I am going to do. That's exactly what we'll be doing. It's just the same as if in the past, or even today, pointing out, all right, we oppose infant baptism. And yet we're going to say, leave it at that? Or can I say, well, the Methodist Church teaches infant baptism, or the Roman Catholic Church teaches infant baptism, or the Presbyterians sprinkling and pouring for baptism. Can I say that? Well, certainly so. You see, this is the same issue that our forefathers in the faith faced as they talked about the issues that were burning in society, religious issues such as infant baptism. So now we're talking about homosexuality. Can we talk about homosexuality in the pulpit? Certainly so. Can we point out those who absolutely stand for homosexuality, those who are trying to break down the family in the political spectrum? Yes, of course we can. Why would anybody be forbidden to say anything about that? I suspect because some people who claim to be Christians align themselves with people who support, or the parties who support, homosexual marriage, aka the Democratic Party. I suppose that's the reason. How about adoption issue? There are those who insist that no adoptions can be made by a Christian family unless they teach their children, the adopted children, that homosexuality is correct. That's going on in the state of Massachusetts right now. A lawsuit in Massachusetts filed this last September 3rd on behalf of the Jones and the Schrocks, who foster children and infants. Families are losing their licenses. These families are in danger of losing their licenses from the state because the policy requires foster parents to sign an agreement to promote, support, and affirm a child's identity or expression. Now, let's just stop for a moment. Is this a political issue or is this a religious issue? Yes, that's right. It's both. I think anybody can see it's both. So, well, keep politics out of the pulpit? Well, depends on what you're talking about, doesn't it? How about in Colorado? Gender identity rules are in place in the state of Colorado for different summer camps. Gender identity rules, you know all that entails. But they decided not to enforce that in Christian camps. That, of course, is something for which Christians are thankful. Can a preacher mention those things in the pulpit, gender identity rules, that are pressed upon people in Christian camps and they have just relented? Should a preacher mention that, or is that a political issue? You see, some don't want to hear about that because the candidates they support belong to the Democratic Party and they support that kind of nonsense and that ungodly homosexuality and ungodly sodomy. That's what's happening here. How about communism? Communism, as defined by Karl Marx, the initiator of Marxism, he called it scientific socialism. Can that be mentioned in the pulpit? Well, what does it say? What is communism? Well, number one, it begins that there is no such thing as a God. All right, should we mention that? Or should we just say, some people say that there's no God? Or is this something that should be mentioned? How about this? It also is based upon the philosophy that there's no such thing as private property. What does the Bible teach about private property? Does the Bible teach there is private property, yes or no? If so, can we mention in the pulpit, as a preacher of myself, can we mention, well, there are forces such as communism and socialism that tell us that there's no such thing as private property because they repudiate the Bible. Can we mention those things, or are we just left to ambiguities and putting things in the clouds so that people really don't know what we're talking about, but we somehow believe in private property, but some people don't believe in it. I don't know who they might be. How about this one? Scientific socialism, evolution, or scientific socialism, I should say, is based upon evolution. Now, I say scientific socialism, that's Karl Marx's phrase. He called communism scientific socialism because it was rooted in the philosophy of evolution. That's the basis of it. The family came about, according to Marx and Engels, that the family came about because of the evolutionary method. It evolved over a period of time. And it evolved in this way that covetous men came up with the concept of family so that they could pass on their goods to their generations following, that they might bequeath their goods in their wills to the children, to keep all that lovely money in the family. That's how they said that families came about. All right, that is obviously antagonistic to the Bible. Can that be mentioned in the pulpit? Or are we talking about politics in which people are going to jump up and down and say, you're talking about politics in the pulpit? What is it going to be on that one? How about private property? Is it taught in the Bible? Certainly it is. Thou shalt not steal assumes that there is such a thing as private property. I wonder if we should oppose, as Christians, a worldview that says there's no such thing as private property. I wonder if we should oppose that, or should we just play shut mouth? How about abortion? Is that a political issue or is that a religious issue? All right, just like all of these, they're both, isn't it? That's because the political field, or the political people and political parties, particularly the left, is running with hobnail boots all over the Bible. That's why. So abortion, should we mention it in the pulpit? And should we mention the forces that are trying to make abortion and make you pay for abortion for other people? Can we mention that? Can we mention that in the pulpit? I think so. Psalm 139 tells us that abortion is wrong. Someone may say, well, wait a minute. All right, on abortion issue, for example, the Republican Party stood against it, but they never made any headway. What has that got to do with it? What if the pulpits to preach against abortion and those in the political right on the spectrum never make a step, never make one step of progress in eliminating abortion? Should we stop preaching about it? Should we just stop talking about it? No, we're going to oppose it. I'm going to oppose it. I'm going to oppose it and talk about those who support it, because people need to know it. That's why. No, we're not forbidden to mention it. Should we forbidden to mention the party that has put it in its platform? No, we should not. We should not avoid mentioning that at all. How about this one? How about environmentalism? I wonder if environmentalism, is that a political or religious issue? What would you say? Well, unless you do just a little bit of reading on the subject, you might think, well, that's only a political issue. Environmentalism today is based upon a worldview called biocentrism. Biocentrism says that all life is equal. It takes Genesis 1:26, that man was created in the image of God, and says that is not true. Not true. Man is not created in the image of God, no more than the animals, the rocks, and the dirt, great beautiful mountain in Colorado, or a free-flowing stream. All of those things are also made in the image of God. So says Al Gore in his book. That's the very center and heart of the environmental movement. It absolutely negates what the Bible teaches about the sanctity of man, of mankind. Well, should we mention that or should we not? Should we not mention that that's an attack on the Bible? Al Gore in his book, Earth in the Balance, even quotes the Bible wrongly. He references, he doesn't really quote it. He references the Bible and says, you know what? In every corner of creation, you can see the image of God. Is he right about that? No, he's not right about that. He is reflecting upon Genesis 1. But that's the basis of the environmental movement. He's the granddaddy of it. Should we mention that in the pulpit, or should we just let's don't say anything about that? Because after all, Al Gore is a political figure of the Democratic Party, and therefore I'm getting into politics. Is that the way it is? How about Lynn White? Lynn White wrote this. Lynn White, I believe he was a college professor, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, he wrote this. We shall continue to have a worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man. He is taking the Bible, saying, put in a big red mark on it. No, that's wrong. I wonder if a preacher should mention that in the pulpit, or are we talking about politics? Are we going to complain now, well, you're talking about politics at this particular point? There are a lot of other illustrations we can give you on this one. Stephen Rockefeller, just one more, Middlebury College, says that, he says, in a biocentric approach, this is biocentrism, that all life is equal, whether it be a bug or a human, all life is equal. The rights of nature are defended first and foremost on the grounds of the intrinsic value of animals, plants, rivers, mountains, ecosystems, rather than simply on the basis of their utilitarian value or benefit to humans. Well, that reverses Genesis 1:28 as well as Genesis 1:26, doesn't it? Because Genesis 1:26, only man's created in the image of God, Genesis 2:7. And because of that, man is given priority over the creation and was told to subdue it and utilize the creation, Genesis 1:28. He says, no, that's all wrong. Now, this is the core, the heart of the environmental movement today. I wonder if these things should be mentioned in the pulpit at all, or are we, oh, wow, you're talking about politics now. Now, they can take the Bible and shred it in front of you and tell your members that the Bible's wrong, but you can't say anything about that? No, I don't believe that. How about the idea that the earth is like a goddess? Al Gore cites with approval the statement that the prevailing ideology of belief in the prehistoric Europe and much of the world was based on the worship of a single earth goddess. And he absolutely agreed with that. I wonder if we should, as Christians, that was in Earth in the Balance, by the way, 1993 book, page 260. I wonder if a Christian preacher should mention that kind of thing in the pulpit, or are we going to be accused of, well, that's politics in the pulpit? I wonder about those things. How about that? How about social justice? Let's talk about that for a moment. Social justice. Bartlett Bow, who's one of the grandfathers of the social justice movement in America, he was a member of the Students for Democratic Society, a communist organization. And that, of course, begins with anti-God. That's right, it begins with anti-God. He started this thing in Cook County, Illinois, which was, of course, the Chicago area. And he says, that punishment should be meted out on a racial basis. That is, we should look at what's going on in the jail system. And he started with juvenile detention, actually. He said, okay, here's the juvenile detention system. And how many blacks do you have? How many Hispanics and how many whites? Well, the scales are tipped in one way because there are many more blacks or African Americans in juvenile detention. He said, that's all wrong. That reflects racial bias in the society. So what we need to do is we mete out punishment according to racial quotas. Racial quotas and punishment. All right. Let's think about that for a moment. Is that a biblical or anti-biblical idea? Well, it's anti-biblical because punishment should be meted out individually, having nothing to do with race at all. But if it is meted out individually, then this is what's going on in our society. So he says we've got to start meting it out on a racial basis, and that is meet racial quotas. I wonder if he's overturning, well, certainly he is. He's overturning the concept that one person will stand before the judge and say, here's what you've done. You're going to go being punished for it. You're going to go to juvenile detention, or you're going to go to prison. That's simple. But Bartlett Bow doesn't like that. So the whole social justice movement, as far as incarceration is concerned, involves this kind of thing, just to balance it all out racially. Is that seeing the world clearly? No, it is not. I wonder if that should be mentioned in the pulpit. That is, that punishment should be meted out individually. I wonder if that should be mentioned in the pulpit. Or are we talking about politics? What is God going to do at the last? Will every man stand before God, give an answer to all that he's done in his life, whether they be good or bad, the deeds? Or is it going to be, well, we're going to have a quota on race? The answer is obvious. Justice, as was put out in the Old Testament and the New Testament, is also designed, according to Romans 13, the government is to uphold these principles of justice the same way, individual basis. How about this one? Slavery. Slavery. I wonder if it should be mentioned by preachers in the pulpit. Should it be mentioned by preachers in their sermons? Well, 100 years, 150, 200 years ago in America, many preachers, they didn't want to talk about it, but many preachers did. And they said, you know what they were accused of? Politics in the pulpit. You're bringing politics in the pulpit. This is a political issue. But you know what? We're all happy they did so. The real problem today is the fact that many people align themselves with principles of ungodly living in a political association. But they don't want you to mention it in the pulpit as if, well, if you say racial or social justice is wrong, or if you say, for example, the environmental movement is wrong, is violating the Bible because of these points I brought out, you're talking about politics. And they think to cover with a blanket the word politics, well, Bill Lockwood can't mention that at all in the pulpit. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. I will mention it because the Bible talks about these things. The Bible addresses these principles very clearly, and the things we've talked about are a complete violation of biblical principle. So it just depends on what you mean when you say no politics in the pulpit, doesn't it? Sometimes there are politics that should be excluded. Depends upon how you define it. But sometimes, because the political world has trampled the Bible under its feet, sometimes preachers better speak out, talk about what is going on in our country.